Good evening. This is a class on Ezekiel. We come tonight to chapter 22. There's an archive code for this class, capital F1, capital II, capital G. Capital F1, capital IIG. That sounds like fig there or something. We're at chapter 22, and we can divide this chapter into three parts. I gave each of you a review question sheet there, incidentally. This chapter can be divided very nicely into three sections. This is the chapter about the defilement of Israel and how she got that way. I gave them out already. You should have one right on top there, Bob. This is a section, the first section of this chapter, the bloody city, verses 1 through 16. And we'll figure out why he called it the bloody city in just a moment. Verses 1 through 16. The punishment is called the smelting furnace, 17 through 22. The smelting furnace. The last part of this chapter, 23 through 31, is the corrupt land. The corrupt land. So you have the bloody city, the smelting furnace, and the corrupt land, all describing Jerusalem and her sins. I think what I'll do here is just go through these verse by verse for you. And in the first two verses, each one of these sections starts with, "Moreover, the word of the Lord came unto me," so you can find it very quickly. Moreover, the word of the Lord came to me about the bloody city, about the smelting furnace, about the corrupt land. So the chapter is very easily divided. And in the first two verses, he calls her the bloody city. Why? She was guilty of open bloodshed, a disregard for life itself. There was murder in the city, so she's called the bloody city. Jerusalem had become as Nineveh was. A place where people were murdered daily, just about.
Memphis.
Yes, sir. In verse 3, you have the second sin, which is idolatry. And this had resulted in moral defilement. Maketh idols against herself to defile herself. So you have idolatry in verse 3, bloodshed in verses 1 and 2. All of that caused the days to draw near, verse 4, meaning their retribution had been hurried up by God because she was so defiled. Verse 4 is not a new sin, it's just telling them the result of their sin of idolatry and bloodshed. And because of that, they had defiled their name. How is it that they defiled their name? They had a bad reputation among the nations. They had defiled their own name, meaning they had a reputation that was terrible even among the nations. Micah will comment on this kind of sin. Incidentally, if you need a note there, Micah 6:16, he just repeats this pollution of the name. In verse 6, we learn that the leaders of Judah had abused their power, even to the point of bloodshed. We have in our society now a political situation where they abuse their power constantly. It's so corrupt. It is so corrupt. In the first part of chapter 7, they had defied the fifth commandment. They did not honor their parents. And in the last part of that verse, I'll wait till he comes back.
He hears the clicking of the door.
Yeah,
The kids. The kids.
I can't hear that.
He heard the clicking of the door.
I know.
It's the kids.
That's what I said.
Gotta let the kids in. He's a good elder. He gets up and washes feet.
I can't. You can hear that. I couldn't hear it. They'd be out there forever. I found out after you get past 80, you say, huh, a lot. Huh?
Or Bob, before 80.
Yeah.
He does the a lot.
Those kids?
There's BJ leaving. He's having trouble with the door. Did you actually hear that?
Yeah.
Wow. I'm old.
He's on it.
I know it. In the last part of, or first part of chapter 6, they had not honored their parents. And then the last part of, or verse 7, I'm sorry. The last part of the verse, they had oppressed the widow and the orphan. In verse 8, we're told that they defiled the holy things in the temple. And they had defiled the weekly Sabbath. Probably weren't keeping it. So you have two sins in verse 8 that have to do with their worship. They also were great liars. And they lied to the extent that people were being put to death because of their lies. Verse 9. Sounds familiar? This sounds like Naboth, doesn't it? Where they lied about him. And then they were lewd in their participation in the idol worship, verse 9. They commit, that is, of course, orgies were the practice around the idolatry idols. That's exactly what they enjoyed about it. Jeremiah never did say anything about this, but Ezekiel does, about their sexual sins. He really comes down hard on them. And it's sickening what he says here. He continues this thought about sexual sins in verse 10. They discovered their father's nakedness. That is, they practiced incest. Amos 2:7. They were having sex with menstruous women, which was against the law of Moses. Leviticus 18. They were committing adultery with the neighbor's wife, their daughter-in-laws, their own sisters. And so, just evil. Everything they can do, they did. They were fond of bribery, verse 12. Of course, we don't have that problem today at all. That bribery incidentally led to the execution of innocent people. They took gifts to shed blood. And then they defiled the law of Moses and took interest from their brethren. They were greedy, and they made great gain by their greed and their Now, what happened here came out of a fundamental transgression. The root sin of all of this, Judah forgot God, completely forgot God. Can thine heart endure, or can thine hands be strong in the days that I shall deal with thee? I, the Lord, have spoken it and will do it. I will scatter thee among the heathen, disperse thee in the countries, and consume the filthiness out of thee. And thou shalt take thine inheritance in thyself in the sight of the heathen. You're going to earn what you got when you go into captivity, and you'll know. See, they forgot that I am the Lord. In a gesture of anger, God is said to clap his hands. Verse 13. I have smitten mine hand at thy dishonest gain. In other words, it's saying, come on, judgment. God's saying, come on, judgment. Come and get it. He's clapping for judgment to come. He's calling it like you would a dog. Come here. There's a positive to come out of this captivity. He said, I will cleanse thee of your filth. I'll consume the filthiness out of thee. So there is a positive to come out of this. And so you have now the defiled nation, and then you have the melting furnace or smelting furnace where they will be. Oh, they must be back.
What title did you give for verses 23 to 31?
I gave the corrupt land. The corrupt land. In verses 17 through 22, we don't really need to comment. The smelting furnace is Babylon. And she will take the dross out of the nation, the slag, the impurities in the smelting furnace of captivity. I know a lot about metallurgy, having worked in that for about a dozen years, 10 years, maybe 10. And no, not quite that long, 65 to 73, 8 years. And you need to get this out of metal or it won't be good to use. Well, you need to get this out of a country too, or it'll be useless. This is spiritual refining in the smelting furnace, verses 17 through 22. And then he describes the corrupt land in the last part of this text. This word defiled means not cleansed. So she is defiled because she's not cleansed. The prophets of Jerusalem had entered into a conspiracy, verse 25. And they had gotten together and said, we're going to tell the people that their only problem is going to be no problem. This nation will be at peace and secure. Now, they got together to decide to do this. Well, God says they have devoured souls by their preaching. That verse 25 is a good description of a denominational seminary. where they devour souls. And they get together to decide to do that too. They're going to teach this error regardless of what the book says. Her priest, now look at it, the priest, even Ezekiel gets after the priests. He said, they've violated my law, profaned mine holy things. They put no difference between the holy and the profane. Wow. They made no difference. They're not one whit better than the prophets, are they? They did not follow the regulations in the temple. It's a wonder he didn't strike them dead the way he did David having to bayou with the way they are here. And again, we get this line, the prophets have daubed them with untempered mortar. Well, that wall's going to fall. The people of the land have used oppression, robbery. They vex the poor and the needy, oppress the stranger, the Gentile, wrongfully. And I sought, look at this, for a man among them that should take up the hedge and stand in the gap before them, but I couldn't find one. You couldn't find one person in Jerusalem who would stand for the truth. Can you imagine? The lectureship in Nesbitt is called Standing in the Gap. It comes from this verse. Jacob, you need to stand in the gap, son. Very few people do. This is a thoroughly corrupt land. Not one moral leader to stand in the gap. Morally corrupt, completely collapsed. Teaching in the universities that we should be anti-Semitics. Can you imagine? In our own country? Wow. No respect for life. Somebody asked President Bush what Israel should do, and he said they have to go after these people. They have no choice. You start cutting the heads off my babies, you're not going to last very long in my sight. And then we got people in this country standing up for them. Good night.
Yeah, and you know the question you ask, if it was you, it was atrocities those people did. I wonder how long you would sit and not do something about it.
Bob, I never thought I'd live in a land where I have to carry a pistol.
Yeah.
I never thought that. Therefore have I poured out mine indignation upon them. I have consumed them with the fire of my wrath. But what I'm reading here, this is not new, is it? This is not new. This is as old as Judah. It's as old as those 4 kings against those 5 kings. There's nothing new. Now, what we're going to have here in chapter 23, I'm going to call this chapter a sad history. And what Ezekiel does is he just goes back in history and looks at the sad history of the 2 sister kingdoms of Israel and Judah. He represents Israel by Samaria, its capital, and he represents Judah by her capital, Jerusalem. And what Ezekiel does here is connects these 2 sisters allegorically to 2 wicked sisters he calls Oholah and Oholibah. Oholibah representing Judah. And both of these sisters were unfaithful to their lawful husbands, but Oholibah was more wicked than her older sister, her other sister. Why? She saw what happened to her other sister and still didn't change. So that represents Judah. So you've got 2 wicked sisters here he's going to mention, Oholah and Oholibah. It's an allegory. You'll see that name there in verse 11 and so on. Verse 5. And verse 4. And so he's got an allegory here. And it's a chapter about the spiritual adultery of Israel in the north first, and then Judah, who is pictured as more wicked than Israel because she saw what happened to Israel. And she had failed to learn from her sister kingdom and was headed for the same fate. And you're introduced to these two sisters, the allegory, in the first 4 verses. They started out as virgins. They ended up as adulteresses. They became prostitutes as they practiced pagan rites. So Oholibah becomes more corrupt in his allegory. She'd been great at one time, verse 6, but then she committed her whoredoms, verse 7. She came out of Egypt. Well, we know that when that happened under Moses. She came out of Egypt, verse 8. In fact, he says here that the idolatry in Judah was more widespread than it had been in Israel. He mentions that the Israelites went into Assyrian captivity, verse 9, just as he rehashes the history here. There in verse 15, he said, girded with girdles upon their loins, exceeding in dyed attire upon their heads, all of them princes to look to after the manner of the Babylonians, of Chaldea, the land of their nativity. He mentions that Judah sent negotiators to Babylon, trying to talk Babylon out of attacking her. That's what he's talking about there in verse 15. She sent her lovers to Babylon, in other words. Prostituted herself to Babylon, trying to get out of the inevitable attack. But what happened was, he says, that the Babylonians came to her into the bed of love and they defiled her with their whore. She picked up their practices more than taught them about God. Can you imagine? She sent these delegates to Babylon and picked up their pagan practices more than influencing them for good. And so she became worse and worse and worse. And then when she tried to pry herself loose from this problem, she multiplied her whoredoms and calling to remembrance the days of her youth, wherein she had played the harlot in the land of Egypt. She went back in history and practiced what she knew was wrong from the beginning. Judah had been practicing idolatry, if I understand that verse correctly, from the time of her inception, Jerry. She never did not practice this. Can you imagine? She is a complete adulteress.
Wow.
Judah, fellows, was willing to say to Egypt, we'll become one of your vassal states if you will protect us. We'll prostitute ourselves to you, Egypt, if you will protect us. That's the message here. Well, that won't work. You remember what Jeremiah called Egypt? A broken reed. Isaiah did too. She can't stand. You know what Egypt does? Egypt says, I'll back you up if you don't back up too far. That's the kind of country she is. And so what a picture you have here of corruption. Well, she's going to be punished, and that's the last part of this chapter, 22 through 35. Gross infidelity must be punished. Therefore, O Oholibah, that's Judah, behold, I will raise up thy lovers against thee. You went after Babylon, you can have Babylon. You know what happens here? Sometimes God will give you enough rope, you'll hang yourself with it.
Yeah.
The Babylonians and all the Chaldeans, Pico and Shea and Koa, and all the Assyrians are with them, all of them desire young captains, or all of them right upon them. They shall come against thee with chariots, wagons, wheels, an assembly of people which will set against thee buckler and shield and helmet round about, and I will set justice before them, and they shall judge thee according to their justices. And I will set, and God says, my jealousy against thee. I think they have made God angry. What do you think? And they shall deal furiously with thee. That word there, furiously, means they will mutilate you. You say, take away the nose and thine ears. You won't be able to smell or see, and the rest will fall by the sword. They'll take your sons and your daughters, and their residue shall be devoured with the fire. They'll go away like slaves, stripped of everything. Verse 26. And they'll stop your idolatry. That's the point. Somebody read Micah 5:10.
And it shall come to pass in that day, saith the Lord, that I will cut off thy horses out of the midst of thee, and I will destroy thy chariots.
He will tell Judah something she didn't learn on her own, evidently. Her attempts to make Egypt her lover very stupid attempt because Egypt hated her. And so did Babylon, verse 28. These Chaldean and Arabs and that part of the world has never loved the Jews, ever. They've always hated them. That fellow from Hamas made a comment just yesterday. He said, we intend to go back in and destroy them all. Well, he's not going anywhere. He's dead now, the guy that said that. But they've always hated these folks over there. Ever since Jacob grabbed Esau's heel, we've had a problem with these folks. And they shall deal with them, hate thee, and take away all thy work, and shall leave thee naked and bare. But here's the thing. He says, your sin will be exposed. It's miserable. It'll be exposed. And God said, I will do these things unto thee because thou hast gone a whoring after the heathen. They're polluted with their idols, and thou hast walked in the way of thy sister Israel. Therefore will I give her cup into thine hand. What happened to her is going to happen to you. And you're going to drink of your sister's cup deep and large. Thou shalt be laughed to scorn and had in derision that containeth much. Israel will become without reputation among the heathen. When you read about sexual potency, you're reading about military power. I don't quite know how to say this, but when these people flirted with other gods, they were dealing with another God who's jealous about that. You don't flirt with somebody else and call yourself a follower of God. I can think of nothing more disturbing than to watch a girl who's married to a man flirt with some other man. Well, what does God think when his own people flirt with other gods? Same thing. And so they're going to be punished, just as Samaria was. And they're going to have this cup of wrath from God, and they're going to, it's good to the last drop, folks. They're going to drink every bit of it. And suck it out. You ever had anybody with a straw and thing getting the last bit out of the cup? That's what he says here. You're going to get the last drop in that cup of wrath, folks. In fact, he said you'll break the shirts. You're going to break the cup, see if you can lick something off of it. And you'll spill some on you and plug it off you for that. I have spoken it, saith the Lord. I think it's good to the last drop, God's wrath. If Syria had taken Samaria, Babylon will take Jerusalem. Here's the key, fellows. I would underline this verse 35. Here is the bottom line. Here's the root problem. You have forgotten me. You put me behind your back, so bear your own sins. There's your root cause. My people have forgotten me days without number. When I think of the love you have given, the songwriter wrote, and I think of the price you paid for me, then the trials on this earth seem as nothing when compared to dark Calvary. And then he added, sometimes I just want to praise thee, sometimes just to speak your name. Sometimes I just want to thank you without asking you for a thing. But lots of folks don't think about the Lord every day. I heard about this fellow was begging on the street and begged this fellow for some money for food, and the fellow said, well, I only have $7, but I'll give you $6. I need this dollar to get home. So he gave the man $6 and turned to walk away, and the fellow jumped him and took the other dollar. What do you think about that, Jacob? God gave us 6 days, and we stole the other one from him. We won't go to church on Sunday either. We're just as bad as that fellow taking that last dollar, or maybe worse. The Lord said, moreover unto me, Son of man, wilt thou judge a whole lot? No, well, yes. Declare unto them their abominations. God said, there's something else I want you to add to this indictment. And that's the end of the chapter now, 36 through 49. This is a further indictment of the two sisters. More to be done to them. You think we've done enough, Ezekiel? Wait till you see what I've got in mind here. You go out and tell them how bad they are. You tell them they've committed adultery. You tell them that blood is in their hands. You tell them they have caused their sons to pass through the fire. You tell them what they've done to me. You tell them that they have defiled my sanctuary and then profaned my Sabbaths. For when they had slain their sons to their idols, then they came the same day unto my sanctuary to profane. My word, they left. They offered a child on the fire altar of Molech. They went to the temple. Surely nobody goes down to Tunica on Saturday night and comes to have the Lord's Supper on Sunday.
There you go. Perfect analogy.
No, they don't do that, do they? You know what an optimist is. Fellow driving by my house on the way to Tunica. Pessimist is the guy coming back. Where they took his money. My road used to be a dirt road, Jacob, but they paved it just so folks can get down to Tunica more quickly. Yeah, absolutely. Moreover, this they have done unto me, they have defiled my sanctuary in the same day. Wow. Now you tell them, Ezekiel, about their murder, and their idolatry and their hypocrisy. Somebody read Isaiah 57:9. Listen to Isaiah. In fact, somebody read Isaiah 58, 1 through 6. Listen to this hypocrisy.
The first one was what, Isaiah 50?
Yeah, 57:9. And then 58, 1 through 6.
57:9. You went to the king with ointment and increased your perfume. You sent your messages far off and even descended to Sheol.
Isaiah is told, say it loudly. Tell my people their sin.
58, 1 through 6.
Yes.
Cry aloud, spare not, lift up thy voice like a trumpet,
I want everybody to hear this, Isaiah.
and show my people their transgression, and the house of Jacob their sins. Yet they seek me daily,
Yeah, they come down to the temple every day and they're a bunch of sinners.
and delight to know my way.
Yeah, they even got a smile on their face and their Sabbath go to meeting clothes.
As a nation that did righteousness and forsook not the ordinance of their God.
Yeah, they act like I bet they carried their little Old Testament with them. Big old scroll got a big old scroll under their arm and a little hat on their head here.
When I was a kid,
Coming down to the
I
temple.
used to sell papers up at the church every Sunday. And if you weren't careful, there were people coming out of church, especially men, stealing the paper.
Yeah.
Stealing the paper from a kid coming out of the church.
Saturday, 1970, whatever year it was, Elvis Presley's body was out in a building out off of 51 Highway at a cemetery up there until they moved it over by Graceland. But they had it in that building. Saturday, I got a funeral out there. It's up there on 51. I forgot the name of it's Memphis Funeral Home on 51 is what it is. Anyway, here comes thousands of people. You couldn't find a place to put your car because the cars are lined up 51 Highway, right? Here come people on walkers, wheelchairs. They're going to go all the way back through that cemetery to look at that building where that drug addict's dead body is. And and I'm thinking, I wonder how many of those folks are going to come and worship God tomorrow. Yeah. None of them.
Wasn't Elvis the king?
Uh-huh.
Wasn't Elvis the king?
Yeah, he was a king, all right. King of prostitution, king of adultery, king of drug use. Yeah, killed himself with drugs. Boy, I said that in a sermon one day down at South Haven.
Oh, boy.
You'd have thought I just profaned the Lord.
Uh-huh.
You don't say anything about it. You know what? While I'm thinking of it, where do they bury evil people?
In the ground.
You sure? Every funeral I've ever been to, the guy went to heaven. You ever heard that story where the preacher's up there purely waxing an elephant about this guy, and the father and the mother says, honey, to her little boy, go up there and see if that's really daddy in that casket. Where do they bury the evil folks? Everybody goes to heaven, you know, if they're an American. And settest upon a stately bed, and the table wherein thou set mine incense and mine oil. I can't. That verse is 40 and 40. He says, you guys got all dressed up to come to the temple, washed yourselves, painted your eyes, and all the time you're nothing but idolaters. In fact, all that time you're drunk with this idolatry. And a voice of a multitude being was with her, and with the men of the common sort were brought Sabaeans from the wilderness, which put pleasure in their hands, little crowns upon their heads. You looked nice when you got there to the temple. Watch this day. I don't. Then said I unto her, God speaking, that was old and adulterous, will they now commit whoredom with her and she with them? Are you going to get worse? Yes. Ezekiel, you tell them that they are going to prostitute themselves even before the Sabaeans. You know what Sabaeans are? Who knows? What are Sabaeans?
The ones that attacked Job's family.
Yeah. Gross pagan rites, my friend. Yes. Yet they went in unto her as they go into a woman that playeth the harlot, so they went in unto Aholah and unto Aholibah, the lewd women. Well, this is getting so bad here. The righteous will judge them after the manner of the adulterers that they are. I will bring up a company upon them, God says, and give them to be removed and spoiled. They're going to pay a penalty for their sins. They're going to be stoned, slain, burned up, destroyed. I'm going to cause this stuff to cease out of the land. Well, any questions about that chapter?
I was thinking about when you said Judah became worse than Israel, the sisters. And when you think about Israel, they were established by Jeroboam with idols. They built in Bethel and Dan what was done coming out of Egypt, golden calves. And that's how they started. Now, how could Judah, who has the temple of God, be worse? When, you think about Israel starting with idolatry and golden calves, and yet they ended up worse. I guess what makes it worse is you have God's temple and you set up idols in it. That's what makes it worse.
Plus the fact that she did not pay attention to what happened to Israel.
Yeah.
I have on occasion, and I don't know what this means, if anything at all, maybe nothing, preached a sermon on hell. I think twice in all these years preached a whole sermon on hell and had people go out the door and say, well, that was a good sermon. What? I'm stunned by that comment. That was a good sermon? You know what hell is, folks? I used to say think about it, I'd say hell is a place of hate. No, it isn't. It's a place of nobody cares you're there. Not even God. It's a place of nobody cares about you at all. That's hell. You know who told me that? My oldest son one day. He said, Dad, you keep saying it's a place of hate. I think it's a place where nobody cares you're there. And I thought about that. I was like, I think you're right, son. Yes, sir. They don't care. God doesn't. Okay, chapter 24. A significant date. This is a significant date, folks. In the 9th year of Ezekiel's captivity, which is the 9th year of Zedekiah's reign. And that's exactly the day that Nebuchadnezzar set himself against Jerusalem. That's a significant date now. It's stated for you right here. And the Jews commemorated this date for centuries by fasting. In fact, let's read about that fast. Zechariah 8:19. Zechariah 8:19. The Jews would commemorate this day by fasting.
Thus saith the Lord of hosts, the fast of the 4th month, and the fast of the 5th, the fast of the 7th, and the fast of the 10th, shall be to the house of Judah a joy and gladness, a cheerful feast. Therefore love the truth and peace.
Now God told Ezekiel, you write down the exact day of the month so that the written record will be there and then authenticated by what happened. And when the news got back from Jerusalem that she'd been taken, then Ezekiel would be authenticated as a true prophet. Three things happened in the ministry of Ezekiel in the same time period that this siege of Jerusalem began. Ezekiel preaches a sermon in the form of a parable, verses 3 through 14. The parable of the cooking pot. He preaches this sermon here. Now in verses 15 through 24, that very same day, Ezekiel's wife died. And this is the very day that Ezekiel is finally allowed to speak. Verses 25 through 27. His dumbness imposed by God would be lifted. And he will be able to preach to these people all the things that God has put on his plate to preach.
How long was he dumb? How long was he unable to speak?
I don't know that exact time period. This is the 9th year of his captivity. Let's go to 11:3. That might help us. I don't know the answer to your question. But if you will write me a 20-page paper on it, I will know. Here,
Yeah, it's something I don't even know.
No, this isn't what I want. This is the background to the cooking pot. Judah had used the idea of a cooking pot, a cauldron, as a figure of invincibility. God's going to use it as a figure of her punishment. How long? Let's see.
It's at the end of chapter 3 when he's not able to speak.
I don't have anything in my notes either, Jerry. Where is that, brother? Thank you.
Yeah, it's
What verse are you looking at?
chapter 3, verses 25 through 27. 26 in particular says, I will make thy tongue cleave to the...
Oh, yes, now shall be dumb. Well, let's see. What year is it? Is there a year given?
No, it's just reading through it hurriedly. I don't...
5th year, almost 4 years, Jerry.
4 years, okay.
Wow.
Almost a little over 4 years. He says, in the 5th day of the month, which is the 5th year of King Jehoiakim's captivity. So he was unable to speak for a long period of time there. If that's right, you check that though. Now 11:3 is the background to this cooking pot parable. They had used it to mean that they were invincible. But now Ezekiel gives the true interpretation. A pot is filled with water and put on a stove. Well, the siege begins, verse 3. So you got the pot on the stove. Now, some people say a watch pot never boils. This one will. Okay? Now, he's going to put something in the pot. Gather the pieces thereof into it, and even every good piece, the thigh and the shoulder, fill it with the choice bones. Go make a stew here. looks like, although I'm not a special fan of boiled meat, up there in New England they have a lot of boiled dinners and things. Yeah, that was what I was reared on boiled dinners up there where I'm from. And yeah.
Potatoes, carrots, cabbage.
Pardon?
Potatoes, carrots, and
Yeah, that kind of thing. Yeah, so we got a pot here with the bones in it. Take the choice of the flock and burn also the bones under and make it boil well and let them see the bones of it therein. Okay, it's cooking quite well now. Everything's going well. The boiling water points to the destructive turbulence of the Babylonian siege. Remember that inside the city, they got so hungry they were eating their children. Now, verse 6 drops the symbolism. Wherefore thus saith the Lord God, woe to the bloody city, to the pot whose scum is therein, and whose scum is not gone out of it, bringing out piece by piece, let no lot fall upon it. Whew. The destruction of the city would take place in stages, piece by piece. What did the law require of animal blood? What'd they have to do with it? Pour it on the ground, cover it with dust, right? Okay. That's Leviticus 17:13. But they're not going to make any effort to conceal this blood. Look at this. For her blood is in the midst of her. She set it upon the top of a rock. She poured it not upon the ground to cover it with dust. Everybody's going to see what happens to Jerusalem. There's evidence of bloodshed throughout the place. Nebuchadnezzar burned the city to the ground, you remember. That it might cause her to come up to take vengeance, I have set her blood upon the top of a rock, that it should not be covered. Her sin is uncovered now. No, everybody's going to see what happens to Jerusalem. Nothing will be covered. Everything will be exposed. I will even make the pile for fire great, heap on wood, kindle the fire, consume the flesh, spice it well, let the bones be burned. Wow. God's punishment now is heaped on Jerusalem. I would call this a conflagration, what happened to that city. I remember when Nehemiah came back to take a look at it, the stones were piled so high he couldn't even get his donkey through them. It was just a mess. And some of those stones were as long as this room, and they were all piled all over the place. Then set it empty upon the coals thereof, that the brass of it may be hot and may burn, the filthy of it may be molded, the scum of it may be consumed. I'm looking at a pot here. Now, if I saw this kind of a pot on the stove, I wouldn't eat it, because it's got some kind of filth coming to the top here. It's not pretty. She hath rid herself with lies, and her great scum went not forth out of her. Scum shall be in the fire. And so it's not a pretty boiling pot here at all. Everything that God had done through prophetic admonition had failed. No further evidence in that direction. That's not going to happen anymore. It's all going to be ending now. And it started to end when Ezekiel wrote this. Nebuchadnezzar was already laying siege to Jerusalem.
Is that the stages, that it will happen in stages? You know, it wasn't just one attack.
No, it took him quite a while to get all of that done. They got so hungry, as I said, they were eating their children. So a siege was the easiest way to take a city. I mean, they couldn't get out to get food. This is the irrevocable divine decree. Now, he preached this for the first time in years. And God said, Ezekiel, your wife just died of a stroke, but I don't want you to cry. Don't you cry. What? Don't you dare cry. Let me give you an idea for a sermon for preachers. This is for preachers, Jerry. When your wife dies, what should you do? First point. Second point is, in fact, in view of any adversity, what should you do? Point number 3, preach, don't stop. I don't know about you, but this statement from God here to Ezekiel is to me, too. The famine of God's people was greater than any of Ezekiel's personal troubles. And Ezekiel's personal troubles as a preacher cannot stop him from preaching to God's people what they need to hear. Ezekiel loved her. I take away from thee the desire of thine eyes with a stroke. Don't you cry. Don't you mourn. Put your shoes on your feet. Don't cover your lips. Don't eat the bread of men. Don't act like all the other men. So I spoke to the people in the morning, and at evening my wife died. And I did in the morning as I was commanded. Brother Neil, deacon at Wooddale, his wife died on a Saturday night. You know where he was Sunday morning? I do. And I'll never forget that. Taught me something. I hear preachers who get into the pulpit and they tell you all the problems they've had all week. I didn't come here to hear that. I don't care about your problems. I want to hear about the Lord. I tell these students all the time, they don't want to hear your problems. I didn't come here to hear that. I came here to hear the Word of God. Isn't that an amazing thought? Don't you dare cry. Somebody read Psalm 39:9.
I was dumb, I opened not my mouth because thou didst it.
Read that again.
I was dumb, I opened not my mouth because thou didst it.
Because thou what?
Did it.
Thou didst what? You're reading it right. I just want to hear it again.
I opened not my mouth because thou did it.
Sometimes it's best not to say anything. And the people said to me, wilt thou not tell us what these things are to us, that thou doest so? Ezekiel, have you got any reason for preaching this to us? And the people,
Is that, brother, is that the people should, are they saying, shouldn't you be mourning?
yeah, they're astonished. Yeah, exactly right. They're astonished at what happened. What happened? And then I answered them, the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, here's my sermon. Here's what happened to me. Here's my sermon. Speak unto the house of Israel. Thus saith the Lord God, behold, I will profane my sanctuary. How important is preaching? The excellency of your strength, the desire of your eyes, and that which your soul pitieth, and your sons and daughters you have let fall by the sword, and you shall do as I have done, you shall not. I'll tell you what Ezekiel's telling them. You don't have anything to cry about either. You brought this on yourselves. Wow.
And this is when he opens his mouth, right?
Yeah.
After being silent.
Yeah. Your tires, your turbans shall be upon your heads and your shoes upon your feet. You're going to go about business as usual, and you're not going to cry over this because you did it to yourselves. You know what? You know what? If there were not an elder here, I'd say something. But some of our brethren need a box of Pampers. Well, you know what a lady told me one Sunday afternoon? I'll never forget. I visited her because she just wouldn't come very often. And I said, you know, we have some wonderful times together on Sunday evening. She said, oh, I can't come on Sunday evening. I said, why? I said, I wash my hair Sunday afternoon.
Something wrong with that.
Had it ever occurred to her to wash it some other time? Oh, me. I've had one person in all these years tell me why he quit the church, the real reason. Everyone else makes an excuse. This guy said, well, they won't let me testify. I said, I finally met an honest person. That was his excuse. He had an excuse. They wouldn't let him testify. Old G.K. Wallace had a stroke and he lost his hearing. And somebody said, he kept teaching his Sunday school class. And somebody said, Brother Wallace, how can you teach that class if you can't hear the questions? He said, I've heard all the questions I care to hear. Me too.
Yeah.
Now watch this. Ezekiel is unto you a sign. According to all that he hath done shall ye do. And when this cometh, ye shall know that I am the Lord God. When you get the news that Jerusalem's destroyed, don't cry. Also, thou son of man, shall it not be in the day when I take from them their strength, the joy of their glory. They loved the temple. Why? It was their stronghold. As long as the temple stood, God was in their midst, and they could do whatever they wanted. She had a family Bible on the coffee table. One of those you purchase from a door-to-door salesman. You ever seen one of these family Bibles, Jacob?
Fancy.
A big old thing. And she had some roses pressed in it and some cards stuck in it, all the dates of deaths and burials and some birthdays. And he was sitting, and I said, how often do you read that? She said, oh, I don't read it. Don't use it at all? I said, what Bible do you use? Well, that's the only one I've got. You don't use it? No. I said, well, I know a family that would love to have one like that. Would you give that to that family? Oh, no. Oh, no, no. I said, why not? She said, because that keeps God near me.
How?
They had the temple. Their joy, their glory. I'm going to take it away, he says. Oh, how they loved that temple. The desire of their eyes, the yearning of their soul, whereupon they set their minds. Let's read Jeremiah 7. Oh, got a problem here. They think the temple means that God's there. You know what this reminds me about? It reminds me of a battle that the Jews had with the Philistines, and they were losing the battle, and they said, get the box. Go get that Ark of the Covenant. Get the box. And they brought the box and lost the battle anyway. You know why? God wasn't in the box. Verse 4. Somebody read it. Jeremiah 7. Look at this. Jeremiah already warned them about this kind of thinking.
Do not trust in these lying words saying, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, I'll do.
Yeah, look at here. We've got a temple. You know God's in our midst. Get the box. You know, if we got just the right preacher, Jacob, we'd start to grow. Yes, sir. Got to have a magic box to grow. Oh, I tell you what we need is the right youth preacher, because if we don't have the right youth preacher, our young people won't be faithful. We got to have a magic box. We're worse than those Jews sometimes when it comes to magic boxes. You want to hear my magic box sermon? I got one. I do. I call it that, Magic Box Christian. Get just the right preacher, right youth minister. If we had just the right building, boy, they'd come. I heard them say that when we were building in a building program at one place. They actually said, not here, but they said, well, when we build this building, they'll come. I said, let me think about that a minute. The Great Commission says, go build a building and they'll come. I must have not read too well. The temple, we've got the temple. But the sad news is that he that escapeth in that day shall come unto thee to cause thee to hear with thine ears, and that day shall thy mouth be open to him which is escaped, and thou shalt speak and be no more dumb, and thou shalt be a sign unto them, and they shall know that I am the Lord. Ezekiel, you'll be able to talk to them too and tell them, God already told me what was going to happen. What happened to Ezekiel will happen to you. God used Ezekiel as a living what? Illustration of how to react. Well, in the next 3 chapters, 25 through 28, we have judgments on the nations. Jerusalem has fallen. Oracles against foreign nations. I call these 3 chapters the universal sovereignty of God. All men are amenable to the law of God. In fact, I wrote an article for the Gospel Journal from the book of Nahum, who is preaching to Assyria. Now, if Assyria is not amenable to God's law, why in the world is Nahum preaching to it? You cannot read the Old Testament and take the position that the person in the world is not amenable to God's law. He is. He may not be in a position to obey it, but he's amenable to it, and he'll be judged by it. What you have here are judgment on the neighboring nations. I'm going to make you a chart, I think. I'll give it to you next week on the chronological sequence here. You're going to have 8 chapters in this book in oracles against foreign nations. And before Ezekiel reveals this fact to his neighbors, he will preach to the nations. 7 different nations in all. He's already taken a shot at Ammon, you remember. Well, he's going to do it again. First Ammon, then Moab, Edom, and Philistia. Chapter 25. He will then take a long shot at Tyre and Sidon, the commercial centers of that day. That's chapters 26 through 28. 3 chapters devoted to Tyre and Sidon. Then 4 chapters against Egypt, 29 through 32. In fact, there are 7 distinct oracles against Egypt in chapters 29 through 32. And I don't think that's an accidental number. a complete judgment of Egypt. 7 oracles, 29 through 32. God is going completely and fully to deal with the enemies of his people. I'm a little bit surprised that Babylon wasn't singled out in all of this. But we have to remember where Ezekiel was. This is the same reason that Esther doesn't go after Persia. She's right there in the middle of that nation at that moment. And so some commentators get all bent out of shape over the fact that Babylon's not, but they've been judged here over and over again anyway. He might have stirred up his neighbors to a foolish resistance had he done that, incidentally. These dates are mentioned from 587 BC to 571 BC. And we're 2 years removed from the mention of Nebuchadnezzar's siege of Jerusalem starting. We're 2 years removed from that. 24, 1 and 2, and 26, 1. And the first 4 here are prior to the first Egyptian oracle. It's interesting, these 4 nations he starts against, Ammon, Moab, Edom, and Philistia, all of whom had caused problems for Israel and Judah over the years. In fact, when Jerusalem was being destroyed, these 4 nations mocked the Jews, mocked God's people. But that was their attitude toward Israel, was their attitude toward God then. And he took that personally, of course. So what you have here is a great chapter for showing people that God's wrath is against all who mock him. Doesn't matter what nation it is. And second, God is still interested in his people who are in exile, but he's also punishing their enemies. So he is concerned about his people even though they're in exile. Well, we learned that from the first chapter when we saw the vision that God was there in Babylon too. When you look at that first sentence in chapter 25, you know that the strongest possible declaration of inspiration is being given. God said, "Set thy face against the Ammonites and prophesy against them." When you have a prophet told to set his face, the prophecy is going to be negative. Because you mocked my temple when it was profane, because you mocked the land of Israel when it was desolate, because you went against the house of Judah when they went into captivity. Therefore I will deliver thee to the men of the east for a possession. You are going to be overrun by Nebuchadnezzar also. This word Lord here in this verse is Yahweh. That's the covenant name. That means that the strongest possible prophecy is coming. These people, of course, had worshipped Chemosh. Back in the time of the judges, the Ammonites were vicious enemies of Israel, Judges 10. One time they laid siege to Jabesh Gilead, 1 Samuel 11. And they had occupied the area that the Judeans were taken out of by Nebuchadnezzar. And they went, aha, they mocked God. Well, their capital will become a stable for camels. Ravach is their capital. This is going to become pasture land when Nebuchadnezzar gets through with it. When Jerusalem fell, I'm sure they had design on what we call Jordan today. They would have liked that West Bank over there, I'm sure. But in fact, Jeremiah 41 hints at that. They clapped with their hands and stamped with their feet. Boy, they were so happy when Jerusalem fell. So God's going to punish them for their arrogance. From the children of the east, that's the Mesopotamians, the Chaldeans.
Didn't they have the idea that their God was greater than the Jews?
Always, yes,
Because
always.
the Jews lost,
Yeah.
so they must have a God with no power.
That town literally became a watering place for camels. When Nebuchadnezzar got through with it, he burned it to the ground. So that literally took place in history. Moab here and Seir, the mountain where Moab is. This is the land of Balak and Balaam and the They were going around saying Judah's like all the pagans. The Moabite stone, folks, tells us the history of the Moabites in this period. Very strong, yet God's going to destroy them. This is not a weak country at this time. In Isaiah chapters 15 and 16, Isaiah talks about the destruction of Moab. Also 1 Chronicles 20. And God's going to open the side of Moab. He's going to give a place of entry into the capital city through a mountainous area. There was a way Nebuchadnezzar could come through there and take this land in a place near Jeshimoth. And so the frontier villages out there would be taken first as he came through that open area, verses 8 through 11 here. The Edomites, Edom means red. If you follow the Esau road, if you study Esau, all of his descendants are called the Dukes of Edom. So to follow the Esau road is to take the road of materialism. This is a very materialistic society. And so God takes vengeance on them and destroys them also during this time when Nebuchadnezzar came through there. And finally, the Philistines, long end-time enemies. The Philistines are playboys. The archaeological digs in this part of the country have uncovered many wine vats. In fact, they were famous for making beer jugs. They were happy-go-lucky drinker-uppers, the Philistines. Not only that, they were famous for making iron weapons, according to 1 Samuel 19 through 23. David defeated them, of course, but they were great fighters. And in the Intertestament period, the Maccabees destroyed them again. But God said that Nebuchadnezzar will do it at this time also. So now in chapter 25, you have the four nations destroyed. Let's take a few-minute break here. I'm losing my voice. There's a man named Dan Billingsley who goes around the Brotherhood, or did. I don't even know if he's still in, telling people that people in the world are not subject to the law of God.
Yeah.
And it's too obvious.
I remember.
I mean, this is just plain explicit teaching here. That'd be almost like saying there's two gods, one for the people in the world, one for us. It's kind of like idolatry.
Well, they have two plans of salvation.
Well, that's true.
One for those that can obey it, and one for those, like in an airplane, they can't be baptized, they're on a deathbed. So they got two plans of salvation. Well, if you could be baptized, go ahead, but what about the guy that's in an airplane? Somebody said that to me.
Well, the exception doesn't make the rule in logic.
Yeah, right, there you go. Well, I guess there's two plans of salvation.
Miss Laura, I understand you are a member here now. Okay, well, you'll have to take the test then.
Probably answer a whole lot more than everybody else.
No, me. Is anybody here taking this for credit, or are you all auditors?
I'm an auditor.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
I'm just here to.
I've got several out there in virtual land that are taking the
Taking the
credit.
test now.
Yeah, Robert Pruitt for one,
I thought this gentleman was, but I don't have.
These are just study questions. Yeah. If you don't challenge yourself with questions, sometimes, well, I would anyway, have a tendency to forget what I learned. So questions sometimes help me remember,
No, no.
you know.
It tells you how you learn.
A high school teacher helped me a lot one time. She said, Keith, you learn quickly, but you forget quickly. She was right, and so I had to learn how to do that. I didn't learn how to study in high school. I was sharp enough I could get it while I was sitting in class, and so it messed me up when I went to college.
No, you have to learn how to study though.
Yeah, you have to learn how.
Yeah, you have to learn.
And I learned that what I thought was studying was just reading. I have to memorize. That's studying. I put it in my head, make it stay there. Oh, Anthony Brown went by my desk one time. We were still at night on. He said, well, that's in my temporary memory bank. I said, yeah, you're right there, Anthony.
Would you go to college undergraduate? Would you go to school?
I'm sorry, I can't.
Where did you go for undergraduate?
I started out at what was called Fenn, F-E-N-N College in Cleveland, Ohio, back in 1958. And I went 2 quarters. It was on a quarter system. And I didn't have money, so I went in the Navy. Well, the Navy sent me to the University of Louisville in an officer training program for a year. So now I had a year and a half of college. But then every door seemed to be closed from then on. They told me I had high blood pressure and they washed me out of that program, so I just got out of the Navy. Well, every door kept shutting on me. And when I became a Christian, Jerry Sullins kept telling me I needed to go full-time preaching, and he wouldn't let me alone. Finally, he talked me into coming down here to school. So I went to Memphis, and I got the 2 years here. And then every door opened. Bachelor's degree, master's degree, MTH at Alabama Christian, and then the doctorate at graduate school. And so it just seemed like every door opened after that. And so that's what happened there. Also, Brother Cates came into my life, and he would not leave me alone. I got through with my bachelor's degree, and he said, "You're not going to stop there, are you?" And they kept after me. And so he challenged me, and I'm grateful for him. He really gave me my life, is what he did. He saw something in me that I didn't even know was there, I guess. And he had a description of me that was, he said, when everybody else sees the donut, Keith can see the hole. But he really not pushed me, but challenged me. And I used to get tickled at him. He'd come in my office and a big smile on his face, and I'd say, "What do you want me to do now?" He always said, that guy had more plan. In fact, this place is really, in a sense, a lot of it has to do with what Curtis dreamed about out here. It's kind of his legacy that it's a 2-year college campus is what it is, in a sense. But he had a doctorate in the administration of 2-year colleges. That's where his doctorate was. So he was the perfect person for what we were trying to do here with the school. And so, but he really challenged me, is what he did. But I'm a privileged individual. Can you imagine being supported all of your life to study the Bible? You know why Germans are flat-headed, don't you, Bob? Good night. These people pay me to come here and study the Bible. Whew. How lucky can you get? I wish our students would catch that spirit. That,
I was just thinking that same thing.
and how fortunate we are. I mean, it's just, I hear some of the people say sometimes what a sacrifice these guys make to come to, I don't see it. It's not it's a privilege. And that's the spirit I would like to see, is that it's a privilege.
If you call it a sacrifice, it's more of a drudgery.
Yeah.
You don't get the enthusiasm of it.
In fact, they probably live better here than they do at home.
But I mean, you have to be enthusiastic.
Do you think that coming here is a big sacrifice or a privilege, Jerry? Which way do you look at Which way do you look at it? As a student, I mean.
You have to ask me that.
No. I think I know what Jerry would say too. But I've had people tell me, boy, they sacrifice a lot. What do you sacrifice? Although I had a man get in my face when I told him I was coming to school here. Oh, what are you doing to your family, you know, and all this kind of thing. I said, well.
I can tell you how my wife and I think we could never pay it back.
I can't either. I owe so much to this
Never
place.
pay it back. And then.
They spent on me $50,000 to train me.
It was worth it.
Just the financial end of it.
Yeah. And then you took our children,
Yeah, oh boy.
our boys, and put them on a path to heaven. How could you pay that back?
Do you know who had got the rule passed that they couldn't put their briefcases on their table and put the lid up? Mark Mosher. That rascal, he'd get back there and close his eyes. I had to make them put their briefcases on the floor from then on. That's the one. But he did all right. He got out of here with a 3.
It was my class that made the rule. You have to get those games off of your computers.
Yes. Well, I ran. Was that the class where I ran back and caught them that day?
Yeah.
They were all back there playing card games. Woo, boy.
What are you guys?
How long did you guys take handwritten notes after that? A long time.
Yeah.
That happened twice. One here, too. Happened with a class here. Don Gary was in it. I caught him playing card games.
On their laptops.
Well, that's one of the reasons they got rid of the computer thing
Yeah.
in the classroom. Yeah. Why do you have to do that at a preacher training school? Why do we have to have a fee on the copier? Because they won't pay their bills. You don't do it that way. Well, now, we're coming into 2 years later. Here it is, 26:1. And we come to the judgment on the Phoenician cities of Tyre, and Sidon, up the coast, way out on the coast now, north, west of Jerusalem. 2 years later now, the word comes about these two cities. Nebuchadnezzar will besiege Tyre for 13 years and never take the island part.
Nope.
The island city will be taken by Alexander the Great, who will use the rubble from the city on the beach that Nebuchadnezzar caused, and he will take that rubble, Alexander will, and build a ramp out to the island and take it.
Called the causeway.
This is September of 587 BC.
It was a very rich city, though, wasn't it?
Pardon?
It was a very rich city.
Yes. Well, they are commercial. They are the commercial centers of that ancient world. Yeah. Yes, sir. He says he will cause many nations to come up against Tyre. Well, the army of Nebuchadnezzar was made up of many different nations as he captured them and so on. Tyre is located 35 miles from the Sea of Galilee, about 100 miles from Jerusalem. And in a few days, the ancient merchants could travel on camel between those two cities. In 330 BC, Alexander accomplished what Nebuchadnezzar could not do. He took the island part of the city also. And turned Tyre, the great merchant city, into a place for fishing boats. That's about it. Eventually she was rebuilt. But she's going to lose a lot of folks before that happens, verse 6. Nebuchadnezzar will be the one that will do this initially in 587. There are 2 harbors at Tyre, not just one, 2 of them. And so the ships could come in and out of there very easily. The city in which I was reared is a harbor city. Here he is. One of the harbors is on that island, the other is on the main city. The island gave the city its name. Saros is the Hebrew word for rock. King Hiram had built a causeway from the main city to the island in his day. That's about 1,000 years, 10 centuries before Christ came. Bob, they sold glassware, dyed materials. They made a beautiful purple dye here, the most expensive dye of the time. It was made from a shellfish that they could find around this area. You remember the lady from Thyatira was a seller of purple. That would be about as good as it gets in those days. This prediction of Tyre's destruction can be divided into 4 paragraphs. Each one begins with, "Thus saith the Lord." And the reason for the destruction, verses 1 through 6, we've already looked at. Because she mocked Jerusalem. Many nations would come against her, verse 3. She become a bare rock, verse 4. She become a fishing village, verse 5. and so on. And so you have the destruction of Tyre predicted. Her daughters there are the satellite towns and villages around her. Sometimes we read the word city in the Old Testament. It'd be better to read that word village. They're hardly a city in the way we know a city. So God will be vindicated in the eyes of his people. The agent of destruction is Babylon, 7 through 14. This Chaldean king is called something here, a king of kings. He had dozens of vassal kingdoms under his power, Daniel 2:37. Now what he did was he brought his army through the Fertile Crescent, folks, and down this way. So he's coming across through Padan Aram down to Tyre. He didn't go into Jerusalem then. I mean into Israel. He's around the north part there when he came. Verse 7. Pardon?
Kind of like what Abraham did.
Yes, where Abraham was. And the villages will be taken, verse 8. Engines are ramparts or a ramp like against the wall. That could also be one of those, what do you call that thing that throws the rock? What do you call that? Catapult, thank you. Could be that too. By reason of the abundance of his horses, their dust shall cover thee, thy walls shall shake, and so on. So he's mentioning how Nebuchadnezzar will take this town, battering rams, mounds, ramparts, and so on. And so you have there then Nebuchadnezzar's the one coming against them. And then, verse 15. While I'm thinking of it, look over at chapter 29, 17 through 20. Here it's predicted that Nebuchadnezzar will not be able to take the entire city. Verse 18. And so we know that from history. He did take the inland part, but never the island part. In fact, Tyre surrendered to him in 574 BC inland. And Sidon would become the more powerful commercial city eventually under Persia. The nations will be concerned when Tyre falls, verse 15. And those who were trading with her would be shocked at what happens here. Those who traded with Tyre will come down from their thrones and lay away their robes and put off their embroidered garments. They'll be astonished at what happens to Tyre when Nebuchadnezzar gets through with her. It'll almost be like Wall Street collapsing tomorrow. I wonder what happened there. How did that happen, they'll ask, verse 17. The nations will ask, how art thou destroyed? You were inhabited of seafaring men, the renowned city. Strong, had a great navy. She and her inhabitants would cause their terror to be on all that haunt. How did that happen, they're asking, the nations are. They're lamenting the destruction of Tyre. The nations, the isles. Again, he repeats this, and that's so Hebrew, to repeat it for emphasis. The nations will tremble at the fall of Tyre. when she becomes a desolate city, verse 19. She's brought down. And so you have first chapter on the destruction of Tyre. Some think that some of these allusions are to what Alexander did later. I don't know about that. In chapter 27, you have a statement here that's very odd. In verses 3 through 11, he pictures Tyre as a beautiful ship getting ready to sail. She has a wonderfully skilled crew. She's just so pretty to look at. This is poetry here, Hebrew poetry, verses 3 through 11. It's a lamentation psalm as he weeps about this beautiful ship brought to an end. In the prose part now, verses 12 through 25, we see this ship stopping at various ports to pick up her cargo. But then in verses 25, the last part of it, through the end of the chapter, the ship sinks. Well, of course, that's a picture of Tyre. So you have a pretty ship sailing, and then she stops at all these ports, and then she sinks. And all the nations are to take up this lamentation. And God sort of says to Tyrus, you've been going around saying, I am a perfect beauty. Jacob, that sounds like a teenager. You know, he stands in front of the mirror and says, oh, you handsome devil, don't you ever die, okay? You got a beautiful ship here now. Thy borders are in the midst of the sea. Thy pillars are perfected their beauty. Oh, what a beautiful ship this is. Dorothy and I had a chance to go on one of those sailing ships out of a harbor in Maine. And that was an interesting. You have done that?
Yeah, well, my brother had we sailed for years. 43 years we sailed on the boat past.
This was just one that they took visitors on,
Yeah,
and you had to do some of the work. You had to do some of the.
Yeah, but I'm trying to think of the name they call those ships.
I don't know. It's an actual sailing ship. You know what was parked in the harbor at Erie for years was the, what's his name, John Paul Jones's ship.
Constitution.
Not the Niagara, what?
Ironside?
Ironside, old Ironside, thank you. Lost my mind there. And mind is a terrible thing to lose, you know. Go, you got a beautiful ship here. And look at the merchant, the sailors. They are from Zidon and Arvad, where thy mariners, wise men, O Tyrus. You had people sailing those ships that knew how to do it. Boy, they were the best pilots. And here are all these beautiful ships. And look at it, just beautiful. Set forth thy comeliness, verse 10. Persia and Lud and Foot were in thine army, thy men of war. You had people from all over the world wanting to sail with you. The rowers hailed from Sidon, the island Arvad. It's 100 miles north of Sidon. People came there. Skilled craftsmen, ship carpenters from all over the world hanged their shields upon thy walls round about. They have made thy beauty perfect. Tarshish, that's way over in Spain, was thy merchant by reason of the multitude of all kinds of riches. Silver, iron, tin, lead, they traded in thy fairs. Javan, Tubal, and Meshach, I'll never forget going down to the harbor in the wintertime and watching the iron ore boats come into that harbor to dock where the welders could go on and do any repairs necessary. My dad was one of those welders. In fact, he fell in there one time and broke his arm and other places when he was welding. This guy could weld over his head. That's how good a welder he was. Class A welder. But anyways, Remember those iron ore ships? In fact, I learned about death that way. One time we were watching this one leave, and it disappeared, and I said, what happened to it? Because it went over the horizon, right? And my dad told me it's just the same size it was there that it is now. And I think about that when we bury someone. They look like they're gone, but they're not. They're just over on the other side over there. Anyways, here are some pretty looking ships, Bob. You want to sail on one of them? You know, I was a sailor, but I never was on a ship. I was an aerial photographer, never got on board a ship, never landed on a ship, didn't even want to get close to a ship. Flew all the time. And so that's what I did. And usually in a plane. I've got a picture on my desk there holding that camera and looking out the side of the... You had to strap yourself in like a window washer and then lean out the door and take pictures.
So you were high a lot.
I was high a lot, yes. Good kind of high there. Of course, I looked down on everybody. I'll have to tell you that story sometime about what we did. They have the house of Tigarma, traded in thy fairs with horses and horsemen. Look at this, how pretty this is. And look at all the stops they made. Damascus, Dan, Dedan, Arabia. They even went down to Sheba there, and Haran, and Kanak, Eden. Wow, they're all over the place. These were thy merchants in all sorts of things, clothes, broidered work, chests of rich apparel, bound with cords. What a group of people. And your rowers have brought thee into great waters. Have you ever seen one of these where they had the men down at the bottom rowing that thing? You've seen that, of course. And that's didn't have any motors, you know. Got to row, brother. Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. No, move out there. Go on. I'm told they could really make that thing move, too. Thy suburbs shall shake at the sound of the cry of thy pilots. Everybody's cheering when you come in. And the oar, they're all great folks. They stand on the land and cheer you. They shout. Uh-oh. They're crying now bitterly. Something's gone wrong with the ship. The people on the land hear the people that are driving, that are steering the ships, cry in despair. And those people who row those ships are come down to see what's wrong. They come down to the shoreline, see what's wrong, verse 29. And everybody's crying out. And everybody's mourning something. The ship sank. I had a chance years ago to take a little boat out, get off of it and stand and look at the names of the men above whom I was standing who were down in the USS Arizona still. I was in Hawaii at Pearl Harbor. And at one time, I'm not an emotional person, but I started crying for some reason. They never got those sailors out of there. Their ship sank. And this one now is sinking. Tyre is pictured here as sinking. She became overloaded in the midst of the sea. This great city that had traded with everybody in the world was sinking. She was overloaded with her sin. She lacked no fear. She lacked fear of God. And the ones with whom she traded will hiss at her She's a terror and never shall be anymore. What city could be compared to Tyre that was lying in a silent grave? Verse 32. Put dust on your head and sackcloth and mourn her loss. In 2007, they asked me to come to Madisonville, Kentucky, and speak on the subject of humanism. I took this text of Ezekiel 28:1, and I mentioned how many of these nations had mocked God's message from Ezekiel, because he kept telling them, the word of the Lord came again unto me, saying, little did I know that 16 years later it would become worse in this country than it's ever been in my lifetime in terms of mocking any word from God at all. That's all that's done now. The word suburb here is countryside. That's a reference to all of those who had supplied these ships, these goods on these ships over the years. Now they were lamenting the loss of Tyre. She sank in the sea. Any questions about chapter 27? Chapter 28 is more of the same, folks. And this we're going to call the Prince of Tyre. This man had claimed he was deity. That's why in Ezekiel's time, God speaks directly to him. And I wouldn't say that that's any particular king of Tyre, but all of them claim deity. And the attitude of the prince is the attitude of the city, and the attitude of the city is the attitude of the prince. He will die, verses 1 through 10. By the hand of strangers I have spoken it, saith the Lord God, verse 10. He will die the death of the uncircumcised. He's lost. He claimed he was God. And then in verses 11 through 19, you have a dirge or lamentation over the death of this prince. Again, I don't know how detailed to get here, but we'll quit after this chapter. The death of the Prince of Tyre.
When you say they consider themselves deity, isn't it the thought of I'm a self-made, I did this myself, look at
More than
what you
that,
did?
thought of themselves as gods.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like they don't need anything.
No, exactly. Oh, I see what you're saying. Your analogy.
Like humanism
Yeah.
today is look
Yeah.
what we've built, look what we've done.
Yes.
Our technology will save us.
There is an ad for cat food that really disturbs me. The line is, science did that.
Yes,
I just tremble.
yes.
The God of science, what an unusual idol.
Yeah, that's the thought I had.
I'm going to suggest that this chapter is about the obnoxious arrogance of Tyre and her leader. And this man exalted himself in the position of God. Because thine heart is lifted up, and thou hast said, I am a God. I sit in the seat of God in the midst of the seas. Now you know what 2 Thessalonians 2 means. That could refer to anyone who sits in the seat of God thinking himself to be God. In Paul's day, that would be Gnostics. In our day, it might be the Pope, but anybody who thinks he's God has got a problem. He's not God. Pride, self-exaltation, all of that is mentioned here. You set your heart as the heart of God. Then in a sarcastic way, you're wiser than Daniel. There is no secret that they can hide from thee. That's a shot at their... Daniel could read dreams, could he not? Because of God, though. Their claim to wisdom is not denied by Ezekiel. That's what they claim. You're wiser than Daniel. With thy wisdom and with thine understanding thou hast gotten thee riches, and gotten gold and silver and that. Incidentally, where do we get our wealth?
We just print it.
From God, right? Yes. They thought they got it on their own.
Yeah.
Self-made, as Jerry said a moment ago. You increased your riches by your own wisdom, and your heart is lifted up because of your riches. You know how much of that they left behind? Therefore, thus saith the Lord God, because thou hast set thine heart as the heart of God, I will bring strangers upon thee, the terrible of the nations. Nebuchadnezzar is coming against this place, of course. The seat of God. In his intellect, he considered himself to be God. But you're coming down to the pit, you'll die the deaths of them that are slain in the midst of the sea. Wilt thou yet say before him that slayeth thee, I am God? Is that what you're going to tell Nebuchadnezzar? But thou shalt be a man and no God. You know, when you get a knife shoved in your heart, it's hard to say you're God. And thou shalt die the deaths of the uncircumcised by the hand of strangers, for I have spoken, said the Lord. I think that's clear enough. I'm God. No, you're dead. I'd say, what a way for a God to go. You heard about that atheist with his suit on and his casket, all dressed up, no place to go. Now, here's the lamentation. This is the kind of sermon I'd like to hear sometimes when you got an evil person. You heard about that fellow that wanted the preacher to do the sermon for his brother who died? He said, you know your brother is profligate. I mean, this guy is so bad. He said, look, I'm going to pay $1,000 to any preacher will say something good about my brother. He said, I'll think of something. So he got up there and told about how bad this guy was and ran around on his wife and beat his children and cheated everybody. He said, but compared to his brother, okay, let's lament over this prince about the same way here, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. Thou hast been in Edom, the garden of God. Every precious stone was thy covering. You wore every jewel there was to wear. You had everything the world had to offer. You anointed the cherubs that covereth, and I have set thee as thou wast upon the holy mount of God. Thou hast walked up and down in the midst of the stones of fire. You're perfect in your ways, but you're dead. Thou wast perfect in thy ways from the day that thou wast called till iniquity was found in thee. Incidentally, fellows, that's a good statement about accountability. Paul said there was a time in his life when he was without sin, but the commandment came and sin revived and he died. Romans chapter 7. There is a time when we are safe, but there comes a time of accountability, and this prince of Tyre has reached it. You have sinned, he tells in verse 16. You're so beautiful, but you sinned. Can you picture this king sitting there with his crown on and jewels all in a robe, and he's so beautiful, and he's so high up there, and he's nothing more than a sinner? Well, I see where the commander-in-chief received $40,000 from Russia. From China just recently. Did you see that yesterday? They've got proof. They got the check stub. Nothing has happened. No, the Department of Justice doesn't care. Pardon?
Nothing will happen either.
No, Thine heart was lifted up because of thy beauty. You were corrupted. Well, I think you got the point. And so we stop at verse 19 with Tyre. We're going to pick up Sidon next week. Right there at verse 20.
That was great.
Thank you.
I had to hurry tonight because I let you down last week. Our Father, sometimes when we study this kind of material, it can get depressing, but help us remember that we're reading about who is in charge, and that gives us an uplifted feeling. And we're so grateful for the faithful and for those who hang in there despite all of the difficulties of life. But when we think about what he went through, then the trials on this earth seem as nothing. And we're grateful for him and for this time to study a great prophet who had a tough time to preach to people who were already angry that they were in captivity and yet had brought it on themselves. We're grateful, Father, that even in those circumstances, thou hast shown thy care. And we thank thee for that and for that inspiration tonight in our study of Ezekiel. Bless each one who studied with us. Bless those who are watching out there in the computer. And bless those who will watch in the future. It's in Jesus' name that we ask it, and amen.